Welcome to Inside College Admission, conversations with admission leaders about matters affecting the college going process. My name is Peter Van Buskirk, and I'm joined today by Mike Steidel, Dean of Admission at Carnegie Mellon University and a longtime friend in this process. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be with you all today.
Well, I appreciate your taking some time out of what's got to be a really busy schedule for you to just kind of sit back and reflect on where we are with things right now. So I'm hoping that everything health-wise is good for you and those close to you.
It is. Family, colleagues, friends, all in a good place at the moment, but taking the shelter in place seriously. And so I guess that's the best that we can hope for.
Yeah, same here. I think my wife would just assume that I started to do some traveling right now, but otherwise we're doing pretty well. But I'm curious, at this particular time of the year when there should be a lot of reasons to celebrate, you've just admitted a class, you're eager to see them come by and they want to come see the campus, and there's a lot of anticipation about what that enrollment will look like. And then of course you have thousands of other young people who want to get started with college planning. What's going on your campus right now? Is there anything that a student wandering by can see if they want to get a look at the other than a beautiful campus? They want to get a handle on what this place is all about?
I mean, there literally is nothing going on campus. We do have about 300 students that have stayed with us that were for various reasons unable to return home or unwilling to return home. And so they are with us in residence halls. They actually did have to move residence halls so that they could be staying in a place that there was a bathroom attached to the room. But most of our services are all online, and our dining services have closed. And for these students, they actually do place an order every day from a menu from our dining services, and it's a pickup. So it's very much like the services that are available here in Pennsylvania. Dining facilities are closed for everything other than takeout. That's pretty much the way it is for these students. But all research is shut down. All teaching is taking place from remote locations. And literally, there are plants and some animals that are on campus that still need to be cared for. And there is provision for that for emergency services to take care of those. But for the most part, everything's closed on campus.
I would imagine that as this whole crisis began to emerge, job one at any institution, but Carnegie Mellon, would be to figure out how we're going to finish the semester with the students on campus. I would imagine also that your spring break was a pretty busy time for your faculty.
It was, and so we definitely anticipated that we would get to this point. The thing that was somewhat a surprise was how quickly we got to this point. And so we scrambled quickly to pull the trigger, although, fortunately, we had business continuity plans in place for all of our units. And certainly the biggest one was a business continuity plan for delivering coursework online if necessary. And so we're in that place right now. And so we all literally took out our business continuity plans and are following them. The challenge is not recognizing that we'd be in this business continuity plan for a long period of time and not just a day or two. And so getting services up and running remotely took some coordination, and the switch from doing these things, providing these services in person, to providing them virtually was an adjustment, but we certainly pivoted, and I think we're very pleased with where we are currently, in that there is the continuity of services provided in all different levels, from what's going on in the classroom to student support to opportunities for those that are in the admissions space to continue to visit the university virtually, to doing chats. We're doing all kinds of things to try to interact with students,
Sure.
in a much, much different way than we would have anticipated even 2 months ago.
Well, speaking of the admission process, as the coronavirus began to emerge in maybe early January or so, you and your crew are in the middle of intensive review. You're dealing with thousands, tens of thousands of applicants, trying to figure out whom you want to admit. Can you kind of give me a rough timeline of how your conversations took place internally with regard to, oh, this is big. Well, maybe we need to get that contingency out now. Were there considerations made then with regard to how many students you would admit and that sort of a thing?
There were, to some extent. And so we definitely saw, once the month of March hit, how accelerated the timeline was becoming in terms of what this might mean for a move to a business continuity plan off campus. And so there was a fairly big scramble to get the read finish from our yield activities taking place on campus to yield activities which can take place virtually. And so that window was not very long. There were discussions in terms of how many students to admit, but quite frankly, I think more was focused on waiting list. Because in the early month of March, it's still, the full implication really wasn't known. And so, we certainly watched other countries go through what we're now experiencing, and, didn't recognize the extent to which it was going to take place here. We saw SARS and MERS, take place and never really hit our shores to the extent that it did in other countries. And so there was a lot unknown, and I think that in many cases where there is some unknown, you try to plan for it or account for it. And the best way possible was waiting list and running a longer waiting list. So no surprise, we've run a longer waiting list. We've admitted a few more, but not much. And now we're in the process of essentially trying to forecast what's going to be the full impact of COVID-19, not just in the immediate future, but ultimately the big question is, what is it going to mean for fall, and how will students respond once that becomes clear?
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to kind of dig into the more immediate for just a moment, if we could. The kids who've been admitted typically would have a May 1 candidate's reply date. An enrollment deposit would be sent, etc. I know that some schools have made decisions to back up that enrollment deadline. They've changed the enrollment deposit amount. Has there been anything discussed of that nature at Carnegie Mellon?
We have discussed it, and frankly, about 16 to 17% of our undergraduates are international. And so when you close the window or shorten the time frame for which students can successfully go through the visa process, it puts that population at definite risk in terms of whether or not they would be able to arrive, given the fact that all is normal, all is well. We're running a full semester on campus. They would be, at a decided disadvantage.
Sure.
And so we felt the pressure to, try to hold on the May 1 reply date as best we possibly could, given the fact that those students then would have as much time as we could possibly allow for them to get visas. Understanding, today the consulates are closed in most countries, the US consulates. And so, it may be a moot point in the long term, but in the short term, if things do begin to come back into full operation, we wanted to give students the full window to be able to apply successfully for visas.
Do you suspect at all that because of the uncertainty of the summer, and you alluded to the wait list earlier, and of course, we could talk at length probably about the Department of Justice actions this last fall and the implications on the enrollment process as well. In other words, the colleges and universities are supposed to, according now to our national association, put less emphasis on specific deadlines. And what it really does is opens up potentially the opportunity for families to shop for better deals, and that could happen in this environment. And it opens up the possibility that colleges may try to poach other rosters for enrolled students. And I'm not suggesting any of this would happen at Carnegie Mellon, but do you see that collectively this could just have an extending effect on the whole enrollment process this summer?
It could, and it's one of the reasons why we felt holding to May 1 can at least begin to, identify the problem, if that is a problem, earlier on than, just kicking it down the road into June and July and then realizing it then. And so that was part of what our thinking was as we thought about extending versus holding to the May 1 reply date. I think the reality is that, at some point, there will be a release back to, what we know or consider as more normal lives than we're currently leading right now. And so, every student that's gone through the admission process, will still be entitled to a college experience. I think the question ultimately ends up being, will it be delivered on time in a normal fashion or not, in an adjusted way or in a different time frame? And that's what we're working hard to try to plan for in terms of alternatives to what is considered the norm in that way. But we've been telling students, look, yes, there's uncertainty associated with COVID-19. Most of it is how coursework will be delivered and whether or not it's going to be delivered in the normal time frame. And but beyond that, once we're on the other side, and we will get to the other side, you will have a college experience, and it will be everything that you would be hoping for, regardless of where you choose to go to school. So that can allay some of the fears. I think that the biggest challenge that we've got is ultimately for those families whose financial circumstances are being impacted by COVID-19. And as you know, and most students may or may not be aware, that the financial aid need calculations are based on financial snapshots which are 2 years old.
Exactly.
And so many families are in a completely different scenario today. Not all, but certainly some are very, very impacted by what's going on right now with a loss of income or significant loss of assets. And so we're trying to work with those families one-on-one. There's a process to go through, a special consideration where the reduction of income or assets is considered as part of a financial aid review. And so I think many institutions are going to be, working hard in this space. And while they may be thinking about poaching new students, but, I think that they've got to work hard to keep the ones that they've got by, essentially taking a hard look at how families are being impacted, during this time.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, folks who felt maybe pretty comfortable about themselves financially coming into this, even a year ago or 6 months ago, in the last 2 weeks, have seen their worlds go upside down, and just taking the opportunity to hear their situations. Now, I'm not necessarily asking you to explain your appeal process, but how important is documentation to you at this particular point when you hear a family saying, woe be us, for whatever reason?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we will ultimately be looking for the documentation. I think the best tool that students have right now is essentially completing the financial aid process as it currently exists to the best of their ability, and getting a finalized package based on, again, the FAFSA and the profile if an institution does require it, and then using the net price calculator. It's available on every college website. It'll allow you to basically put in the data that you use for the FAFSA and the profile, and then, essentially it should give you an aid package pretty similar to what you've officially received from the institution. but then begin to estimate the impact of a reduction in income or a reduction in assets and rerun the calculation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the best, essentially look at how a financial aid package could conceivably be changed as it relates to changes in assets and income. Wow. And if you see there's some significant changes that are warranted, then go through the process. And we'll eventually be following up for the documentation, but go through the process. But use the net price calculator first as a great way to essentially assess whether or not it's worth going through the special circumstances or appeal process.
And I guess, I don't want to belabor this at all, but I guess one other thing that's worth noting is it's better to do this sooner than later.
You can do it many times. And so, at least going in saying, okay, I'm worried about my loss of income or my change of assets now. This is what I think it is now. But I think the timing is really important. Many institutions will allow students to appeal aid well into the fall. And so while I recognize students may want to know the answer now, the best answer might be the net price calculator. And then when things really do settle and things have become finalized, then you can go through the process formally. At Carnegie Mellon, you can do it all the way up through through October. So there are ways to continue to adjust aid packages well into the fall semester if needed. Okay. So you have a tool to estimate ultimately the changes. And once those changes become pretty firm in terms of a change of assets or a change of income, then go through the process and file the appeal.
Excellent. Thanks for walking us through that. I appreciate that. Now, kind of getting away from the nitty-gritty of the management side of it, again, we alluded earlier to the fact that there are a lot of young people who want to feel the place, experience the culture one more time. What are you and your team doing now to give young people that opportunity to experience Carnegie Mellon before they make an enrollment choice?
Well, there's a lot of video that's available, and in fact, I'm starting to worry about if it's too much in the sense of, how can you consume it all and make a decision. But, I think students ought to reach for as much video content as they're willing to consume. But I do think that, we have students that are ready to engage, as campus ambassadors. They are very willing to talk with admitted students. We have some calling, but we also have opportunities for admitted students to set up appointments with current students to find out what the experience is like. The same is true for faculty and advisors. So in general, there are some really great opportunities to engage. And I think students, excuse me, at this point are somewhat overwhelmed, don't know where to start, and how to navigate all of these virtual sites, because we're all pretty much offering the same thing. And it's challenging to essentially figure out where to begin.
Mm-hmm. But there is that virtual opportunity. I'm curious, and I don't know why I even think about it, but have you employed drones to put together the virtual tours?
The 3-minute and the 10-minute version.
Really?
So if you want a long look at the campus, you can have the 10-minute version. If you want the 3-minute version, you can do that too.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, look where technology is taking us.
Yeah.
Do you have any conversation at all about when you think the campus might open again, or is that just much too premature right now?
Well, our summer programs are only operating virtually, so we've already made that decision. So essentially no residential programs until we're on the other side of August 1st.
Wow.
So we've already made that commitment. We felt like it was really important for students to know, what their options were for the summer. And so that includes our high school summer programs as well as our college level summer programs and all the programs for executive programs that exist on our campus. They can still exist in the virtual space. And right now those programs are trying to determine whether or not to offer that coursework and content in a virtual space and at what cost. But for everyone who's registered, we're returning all of the tuition and fees collected and allowing students to re-up with the new, essentially revised delivery of content to decide whether or not they want to do that.
That's regarding summer program.
Yes, summer. So we just decided that this past week.
Mm-hmm.
So now our full attention is turning to contingency planning for the fall.
Yeah.
I think it's still early yet to know, exactly what's going to happen for the fall. We're still, trying to flatten the curve. And with COVID-19, if we're successful in flattening the curve, unfortunately, what it does is it takes, the volume and flattens it over a longer period of time. And so we just don't know our success in flattening the curve and how far out this is going to extend. As I said before, I think, my line is our headlights can't see that far yet in the distance.
Right.
It's just not that clear yet, but, we're anxious to try to determine what that is. And some of that decision will be made, here on campus, but clearly a fair amount of that decision is going to be made external to Carnegie Mellon. And so, our federal and state governments have to open up and obviously release travel and public gathering space. And, I think we've all become, clearly aware of the fact that that's not going to happen in the next several days.
No.
So, yeah.
It sounds like, though, you are pretty well prepared with contingencies to deal with that kind of activity virtually or remotely. Again, that being the connectivity with students, with counselors at schools, programs that might be done as webinars on high school campuses, so that there might be a plan B that's not too far away.
Admission, yes, but I think university-wide, I'd say this. I mean, it's different finishing the last 5 or 6 weeks of a semester, through online instruction. It's another thing to begin, an entire semester in that way. So there's a lot of thought right now that's going into, what is the implication of that versus, potentially starting the fall semester a bit later, or potentially deferring entirely to the semester after that. And so I don't know, and I'm clearly not the decision maker. I think we're all essentially in the same position where there's several questions that have to be answered, and we just don't have all the information yet to be able to make those kinds of decisions.
A very unsettling and uncertain and dynamic time yet. Well, with regard to the students who are in the next cycle, the things that are seeming to be top of mind for them now include testing. What's going to happen because I haven't been able to take tests, SAT, ACT this spring? Are they going to be offered this summer? We don't know. How are you responding to the young people who are feeling like their ability to put forward their best effort with testing has been compromised by?
Yeah, so what we do know, obviously March was canceled, May is too. We don't know anything beyond that.
Right.
And so I think our decision point is coming based on the next test administration beyond June. And, I mean, clearly the name of the game in this entire business is flexibility, during this time. And so, we want to be flexible, and we feel, that once that information about the next round of tests becomes clear, it's going to cause us to really move in a different direction than we currently have planned for at the moment. But we're ready. And so we don't want to necessarily come out and say, if this, then that.
Right.
We want to wait for it to transpire. I mean, who would have thought that the College Board was trying to mount the advanced placement test in a take-home version?
Oh my.
But they are. And so, we feel like we are poised to be flexible when the information becomes available, and we need to make the decision. We'll certainly move in that direction. But our best foot forward is, that we want to be as flexible and as understanding as we possibly can, and hoping that, with the right amount of information, we'll be able to do that.
Absolutely. You touched on something that I find interesting at this point, and that's the AP and the offering now of an online but shortened version of the AP exam, which is, as you know, in the transition to college process, the AP says something about the rigor of an academic program that the student's involved with, but sometimes colleges will respond to that advanced placement experience, especially the advanced placement credit, with some kind of placement or credit. If the College Board is going to reduce the material covered by roughly half in some of the AP exams, how do you think schools, and I'm not asking you to speak for Carnegie Mellon, but in general, how do you think schools are going to respond to that when it comes to assignment of college credit possibly, or advanced placement for that work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we've, definitely tried to tackle here. The thing that we want to try to do is hold students harmless. They're certainly not the cause of COVID-19 and the accommodations that are trying to be made in the space. I recognize that some schools are doing just an amazing job of, not losing a beat. And then there are others that are severely compromised based on what resources are available to them in order to be successful in that same space. So I think that, tolerance, forbearance, flexibility is the name of the game here. And while, we recognize that it may not be fully reflective of what we would normally see in the results of an AP exam, we're not going to hold the student, responsible for that. And so we'll continue to award credit as we have. And so we've already come out publicly and said that. But I recognize, it may be that it is, a different scenario in terms of the amount of content they're walking in the door with. And we'll have to do that, deal with that on our side. I mean, International Baccalaureate is taking a different approach, but quite frankly, they're not offering the IB exams at all, but they're going to be regrading centrally all of the work done in the IB diploma courses this past semester, and then offering essentially a calculated IB result in July, and we'll take that as well.
And that's not too far removed from what they would often do is with the projected result.
Agreed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Very good. One more thing I'd like to kind of expand upon just a little bit with regard to next year's applicants. They're going to be kids sitting down trying to write college essays, and they've been hearing about taboo topics. Is coronavirus going to be a taboo topic this next year?
I don't think so. I was at Carnegie Mellon in the class that applied after 9/11, and it was, a significant time, a very impactful time in the lives of all of us in this country, and certainly for those students that were, going through the experience and witnessing it, while they were juniors and seniors in high school. And I'll be honest, it was the common essay for, not just 1, but 2 years in a row, because it did significantly impact them. And so, I feel that how can students help, but, write about something that's had a significant impact in their lives. If it's been something else, that's great. And we'll continue to read, essays on a variety of topics. But for some, it will be COVID-19 and the impact it's had on their lives. And ultimately, it really has, caused us to question all of our lives at some point. And, what we have taken for granted in terms of what life is and turned it on a dime. And we are living completely different lives than we led 4 weeks ago. And that's, in some ways, absolutely stunning. It probably won't happen in our lives again. But clearly, this is a watershed moment in the lives of, those people that are currently, in this country and on Earth. It's just it's an amazing event.
It's an historic event. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that perspective because, as you know, kids get nervous with
Yeah,
regard to the choice of a topic. And I tend to say, don't worry about the topic, focus more on how
how it's
that
impacted you. Yeah.
how it impacted you exactly. So I think we're really strongly in alignment there. One more thought here, Mike. Let's suppose you find yourself in the company of a 17-year-old, soon to be high school senior who's a little overwhelmed by what's going on in the world and is really uncertain about how to approach college and college planning. What advice would you give to that young person today?
I think, it's the same advice that we would give, to most, in that I think you've got to know yourself. And so, be comfortable in your own skin and know yourself and have a good sense of who you are. And that will ultimately drive, what you're looking for. And yes, this is something, COVID-19 is something that's affected and impacted the college admission process. But it's interesting, in dealing with the limitations of campus visits.
Mhm.
We've definitely heard from those that ordinarily wouldn't be able to visit college campuses because resources just don't allow. And what we're doing online is benefiting them so much more than what we've allowed them to participate in the past. So in some ways, it's been a tremendous wake-up call for us that suggests that the college admission process literally can be done without a campus visit. Now, would I recommend it? If at all possible, I think it's important to visit a college campus. But if the resources or if the circumstances don't allow for it, there are certainly ways to be able to make an informed campus choice today. And I feel that they're probably better armed today than ever before in terms of making the process work for them, given the amount of information that is currently become available in this space that probably should have existed way before this, but now we're all forced to provide it. So in some ways, my heart goes out to those that aren't able to visit. But I especially, I'm thinking now about those that haven't traditionally been able to visit and have had to make their college choice, given the fact that a college campus visit wasn't among the possibilities that they had in terms of investigating a college or a university.
So I thank you for that. As the storm clouds of this particular crisis pass at some point, do you think we go back to business as usual in the college process?
Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about that on our staff this morning, and some will say that life returning to life as we've known it will be different. And I mean, again, I think that in particularly significant times of significant change or impact, we're all going to be changed, and there won't be going back. I think we're going to do things better, and we'll, I think, hopefully value that in the interactions that we have with people in person that right now we aren't able to have. And while I certainly appreciate what technology brings, it certainly isn't the same as a face-to-face, in-person to in-person contact. And it's something that I know I have taken so very much for granted. And now, I think I'm looking at opportunities to reconnect with families and friends and colleagues and prospective students with a completely different lens. We're all going to be changed by this, and hopefully for the better. But I think that taking for granted the normalcy of life is something that I think we have to all think twice about as we go forward from here.
Well said. I appreciate that. Before we let you go, Mike, is there a resource to which you would point students and parents with regard to Carnegie Mellon, the web page on your website, so that as they've heard this conversation, they'd like to know more? Where should they go?
Well, certainly as it relates to admission, our own website in the Office of Admission, but college websites today are beasts. There's so much content that's available out there. I mean, you could literally spend what you would normally spend in terms of time on a campus visit. if you invested and had the attention span to invest in that time by searching on the web, you would find so much rich content available. And so certainly web resources. I think, students certainly like social media platforms, and there's a lot, and, a lot of people have opinions about colleges. Some are good, some are not so good. But I think students have to weigh in those as they will conclude best in terms of what serves them best. But certainly, I think college and university websites are great places to start. And social media platforms obviously will have plenty to say about the college admission process in general.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you for taking some time from your day to kind of reflect and ruminate on what's going on in the world with us. I know that the folks who are listening in will really appreciate your good thoughts here. So thank you, and I wish you and your team well as you move forward into the unknown of the coming weeks. And for those who are listening in, I appreciate your time as well. Check with us again when we'll be talking with other deans of admission. In the meantime, have a safe day and take care.
Good luck to all.
Thank you.